And welcome to all our panelists as well. It's great to have you all here. And thanks for being early. All right, let's go, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sure more people will join in the conversation. Once again, good afternoon to you all, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. My name is Didi Akinyelure, and it's an honor to be your moderator for this Africa CEO webinar themed Infrastructure. Is the African private sector the missing dot? This is the second, as I said, of 3 in our webinar series on infrastructure development in Africa in participation with Africa 50. In this particular webinar, we ask how to strengthen African private sector participation in the funding of infrastructure projects on the continent. Now, there's no doubt that a key constraint to economic growth in Africa is the dearth of adequate and functioning infrastructure. And much has been said about Africa's infrastructure paradox. We know that the continent does not lack capital, and we are certainly not lacking in projects, but investors struggle to match these funds against viable projects on the continent for many reasons, many of which we have pointed out in the first part of this webinar series, where we asked if the AfCFTA would be a game changer for African infrastructure. We had a very interesting debate there, and what was clear is that an improved enabling environment is key to attracting funding for infrastructure projects. We also know that African investors have a competitive advantage over foreign investors, as their understanding of infrastructure investment risk is influenced by local knowledge and past experiences. So the question is, how can we encourage African private sector participation in infrastructure development, and how can private sector actors become key players in regional project development? Just to quickly point out, the next webinar, so the 3rd in this series, will be coming up after the summer. And in that session, we'll tackle innovation and ESG aspects in the infrastructure space in the context of climate change and the continent's rapid urbanizations. That's a very important one, so do keep an eye out for that, and I'll share some more info on that, or we will share some more info on that as we come closer to the date. Would like you all to be part of the conversation, so if you can, please use the Twitter handle #ACF, that's Africa CEO Forum, ACF Digital Events. I think it's right there. So let's kick things off. So there you go, follow the live tweets. So right, let's kick things off, ladies and gentlemen. In this session, we'll be hearing from inspiring leaders structured around a series of presentations and panel discussions focused around 3 key points. You can see all our speakers there, all very distinguished, and we're very, very happy to have you on with us today. However, to kick things off, we will first of all start with a 7-minute presentation from our expert, Jude Moore. He's Senior Policy Fellow at the Center for Global Development and a former Minister of Public Works of Liberia. He's a leading expert in African state building, governance, foreign and development policy, and political economy. And I'm going to say congratulations to him, because he was recently, I believe it was yesterday, recognized as one of the world's top 50 thinkers of 2021. So it is an honor to have you join us today, and over to you for your presentation.
Thank you, Didi, and it's a pleasure to be here. I actually feel like a top 50 thinker this morning, so really, really excited to be here. And I'm just as excited to listen to this panel as the participants. And so I'm going to do what I'm here to do, which is sort of establish context and just bring out some numbers of what we're talking about, and then turn to the panel to solve all of the problems in Africa's infrastructure. All right, so I thought I would begin my time just with a quick anecdote. I live in Washington, D.C., and in the middle of the pandemic, when we were in shutdown, I drove to Pittsburgh, which is about 4 hours away, and to pick up my daughter. And as I was driving, I didn't see many passenger vehicles, but what I did pass were these large trucks, 18-wheelers, camions en français, like these large trucks. And at some point, I was actually afraid because there were so many of them. But because I'm steeped in thinking about infrastructure, it made sense. We're in the middle of the pandemic. Everyone is purchasing online. So every time you click on Amazon, the material you're ordering has to come from a port to a warehouse, from a warehouse to a processing center, from a factory to a processing center. So as much as we have spoken about COVID-19 being an accelerant of the digitization of commerce, you still need an infrastructure backbone on which that digital economy functions. And that's what we're having this conversation today. The problem in Africa, though, is the second issue I wanted to raise about Africa is just the sheer size. I think most times when people talk about Africa, it doesn't occur to them how massive the continent is. And the example that I like to use is the distance between Berlin in Germany and Beijing in China. If you were to travel by road from Beijing to Berlin, the distance between the two is still 1,100 kilometers shorter than the distance between Cape Town and Cairo. And you still be on the same continent. And this is the size and the scale and scope of the continent where we're trying to build infrastructure. So which brings us to the numbers that we're talking about today. One of the issue is that the infrastructure need in Africa, the deficit in Africa, is 40% greater than the projected and forecasted investment in infrastructure. Now, forecasted investment doesn't mean it will materialize. So just the forecast is still 40% lower than the infrastructure need on the continent. The IMF, in a paper they produced, I think 2 weeks ago, noted that only 2% of global private flows, FDI, was actually going into African infrastructure, 2%. It didn't make a distinction between domestic African capital and foreign African capital. It just basically said domestic capital. So what do the numbers look like? We had a chance to look at the numbers from McKinsey, and that's where I want to center my comments. It shows that between 2015 and 2025, there were about $2.5 trillion worth of projects across the African continent. However, of the $2.5 trillion worth of projects, only 50% of them actually reach feasibility stage. So half of that doesn't even reach the feasibility study. Of the 50% in the feasibility stage, only 20% actually comes out of feasibility and planning, reducing further the amount of projects that are actually available to invest in. And of the 20% that comes out of feasibility and planning, only 50% of that, half of that, reaches financial close. So we have a continent that lacks every other region of the world in coverage of roads, power, ICT, and yet only about half of the projects that finally reach the planning stage actually get implemented. And so in this space, though, who's financing infrastructure in Africa? The private sector is playing a very, very diminished role. And how can we? So first, over 42%, between 38 and 42% of all infrastructure on the continent is actually paid for by African governments. The next big players are your multilaterals, your World Bank, African Development Bank, and then China is a massive player as a bilateral, right? The smallest piece of all the investors in infrastructure in Africa remains the private sector. This is where the greatest growth is. The IMF is also projecting in the same paper that the private sector can bring annually up to $50 billion for investment in infrastructure in Africa. The IMF paper also notes that 95% of infrastructure investment projects in Africa are either owned by the African governments or state-owned enterprises, which leaves a significant vacuum and gap for the private sector. How can the private sector help close that gap? Along the way, their issues come up. The one thing you hear over and over is that there is no pipeline of shovel-ready, investment-ready projects in Africa. And usually people say this and it sounds sophisticated on infrastructure. I get upset when people say that, especially people from development finance institution. What looks to be missing in a lot of instances is money put at risk in the development stage of the project. From the numbers I've listed, you can tell that it is not simply the absence of money, because projects that get to the feasibility and planning stage still do not reach financial close or first disbursement. So there are governance issues. There are issues with currency. There are all kinds of barriers, and hopefully the panel will talk about what these barriers are. I wanted to just end my comments on the future. What can we expect in terms of the private sector? We have seen just a huge deluge of private money available. And for some reason, that private money continues to avoid the massive infrastructure gap that is in Africa. What needs to happen to marry these two? The money that is available, because investors with up to $11 trillion in assets under management have interest in African investment. But for some reason, we're not able to marry that interest in African investment with the need that is on the continent. My hope is that this distinguished panel will be able to answer some of these questions and help to bring some clarity to why we're seeing such a diminished role for the private sector in African infrastructure and how we can increase that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Judy Moore there. Thank you so much for that. Interesting, as you said, to see that infrastructure financing chart that you shared with us. And as you said, African national governments taking approximately 42% of the pie, the private sector taking a very low, 2.8%. So it's very clear we need to do more to encourage private sector participation in infrastructure funding. So let's get started with the conversation. I'd like to welcome our esteemed panelists to the session. First of all, there will be a poll coming up. I haven't forgotten that, but I'm just going to welcome our guests first of all. First of all, we have Lamia Mazuki. She has been the Deputy General Manager of Casablanca Finance City Authority since its launch in 2010. She's also the co-chair of the Financial Centers for Sustainability Network and the co-lead of the Africa CEO Network in Morocco and the North African cluster of the Women Working for Change Network. It's great to have you. Franny Liotier is Senior Partner at Southbridge Group and CEO of Southbridge Investment. She's a highly experienced and well-known finance and development expert. She's had an illustrious career at the World Bank Group, where during her 15-year tenure, she held senior positions across the group. Welcome, Franny. And we also have Akin Dauda, CEO of the Gabonese Fund for Strategic Investments, an institution designed to develop new sectors capable of generating revenues that can replace those from oil production. He's an investment professional with over 15 years of experience in facilitating infrastructure projects, trade deals, and fostering social and economic development across the African continent. So it's very good that we have three very esteemed panelists who will be answering our questions today. Before we go straight into the questioning though, I know we're going to have an interactive poll come up because we want to keep this as interactive as possible. So there you go, ladies and gentlemen, that's the question. Besides funding, what could be the private sector's biggest contribution to infrastructure development? Do you think it's in the area of innovation and technology, skills development, or capacity building, particularly to tackle future challenges like climate change? So do you pick one? I'll do the same as well. Let's see. There you go. All right, I will be bringing the results of that poll after our first key point, which we shall move on to now. So first key point of the day, ladies and gentlemen, the estimated funding gap in the continent is estimated by the African Development Bank to be between $68 and $108 billion per year. That's pre-COVID. So how do we get the private sector more involved to tackle this, right? I'm going to start with Franny. Franny, I'd like to ask you, what incentives can encourage the participation of private sector in infrastructure financing, and what financial framework could be developed to foster infrastructure development? Franny.
Thank you very much, Didi, for the question. And I really enjoyed the presentation that Gude made. And I'll pick on three of the risks that he raised to answer your question. I think the first thing that the private sector looks at when it goes into a particular sector is returns. And of course, these days, many in the private sector are focusing on impact investment. So they look at the financial returns, but also the track record of impact that their investments would make. So how do you generate financial returns that would attract private investment in the infrastructure space? I think the governments need to do three things that would be game-changing in order to bring in large-scale private sector investment. And the first one has to do with unlocking the opportunities across countries that would enlarge the market that would bring in these investments that infrastructure would be supporting, unleashing, or connecting. So let me give a couple of examples. If you look at the public-private partnerships, which have been so critical to bring in infrastructure like roads, railways, airports, and fiber optic cables and so on, many of them took place when the government came in and opened up the opportunities first to do with land acquisition. Land acquisition remains one of the major sticky points in almost all infrastructure investments in Africa. It's the main reason for delays, main reason for conflicts, main reason for creating challenges even during the execution phase. So I think if governments can focus on that, it can unlock a lot of potential, particularly in cross-border infrastructure. The second key area is standards. It is surprising when you look even within countries, take the example of railways, you find countries having railway systems with different gauges. So you can't have an interconnected system even within one country. So having common standards that are understood and practiced across the board are very critical, because that allows the private sector to go at scale. If you are in the construction industry and you have to construct to different specifications in every project, it is much more costly because you need different equipment, you need different technical skills and so on, and the private sector cannot achieve economies of scale. And then, of course, the third key area is how the government is going to support the policy environment that brings in innovation and technology, particularly to adapt to climate. The environment in which infrastructure is coming into Africa is going to be very different from how the federal highway system in the US was built, or how the railway systems in China were built, because Africa is investing at a time where these infrastructures have to be protected from a lot of climate risks. Take the example of Mozambique. After constructing and modernizing the port of Maputo, you get a tsunami and multiple flooding events, and the investment has to be redone almost from scratch. Similarly, when you take the highway systems that have been built and washed away by heavy rains. So I think these three areas are critical, and once they're there, private sector investment would flow. But I'd like to talk about the last one, which is, Gyude raised it as the number one risk for private investment in Africa, which is project-related risk. And I think here the government has a really good opportunity to unlock potential and take risk in the areas that would be appropriate given where we are. So for example, today government is owner of a lot of infrastructure. And if it can package that infrastructure properly and use innovative instruments like sale, lease back, and other such solutions, it can unlock value in what it has already de-risked, because that infrastructure is already there and functioning, and use the capital that comes from that to take more risk to build new infrastructures. You have examples, for instance, the Houphouët-Boigny toll road in Abidjan, which had that kind of solution, and it allowed private capital to flow in with support from the African Development Bank. You have the way the fiber optic cable in the eastern coast of Africa, which was done in a similar way, and that unleashed the whole mobile payment systems and the digital revolution and so on. So I'll stop here because I thought I should pick on those three areas that Gyude raised in his presentation of what government can do to support private sector.
Yeah, thanks so much for that, Franny. I'd like to bring Akim in here as well. Perhaps you'd like to add to that, but also as a state investment arm, it would be good to know if you are looking to co-invest with the private sector. Tell us how relevant this is to your mission, and perhaps you could give us examples to elaborate your point. I think you're on mute. Yeah.
I was doing the same as you. I'm sorry for that. Awesome. Let me just take a second just to thank Africa 50 and the Africa CEO Forum for organizing this webinars. And I can't agree more with Friday intervention and Jude intervention as well. And you mentioned that we state investment arm, and let me just give you some context of the Sovereign Wealth Fund and what we do and why we were established. We were really established to create a saving base for future generation in Gabon. And as that, we have a requirement in terms of result and return on investment. And today our mission is really to support the government in its transformation endeavor. And such transformation, the backbone of such transformation, obviously, are infrastructure. Now, to more specifically answer your question, as the Gabonese Sovereign Wealth Fund, working with private sector for us is really an integral part of our strategy. Actually, you will rarely see us diving into a project without the private sector involvement. Our approach here really consists in moving a project from concept to pre-feasibility stage, and working with the government to put in place a conducive environment for the investments. And one of the examples that I can cite to that effect is the recent closing of the Kingele Aval project in Gabon, which is an hydro dam project, hydropower project that we developed with Meridiam, which is a French investment fund. And basically, the SPV is owned by, at the level of 60% by Meridian and 40% by the Gabonese Sovereign Wealth Fund, by the FGIS. So the plant is set to be in line in 2024. It's a 35 megawatt hydropower plant. And we're really excited about this because this is the first IPP in Gabon. And we're really looking at developing many more in the, getting at least to financial close many more projects in the month and year to come. So this is really to really conclude on that, working with the private sector is key for us to find the resources to develop our infrastructure in Gabon.
That is great. Yeah, you were going to add?
I just wanted to add that it's a real essence for the Sovereign Wealth Fund to be crowding in investors to develop those infrastructures. Right.
And Lamia, over to you now. Casablanca is seen as a gateway into Africa. Tell us what role a platform like yours can play or plays in channeling more private sector capital into infrastructure funding.
Thank you, Didi. And good evening, good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to start by echoing what has just been mentioned by Mr. Moore, Franny, and Akim. I agree with all the challenges that have been mentioned and the striking fact that nearly 80% of infrastructure projects in Africa are simply not getting off the ground. And for me, and from CFC's perspective, the greatest challenge for Africa right now, beyond the lack of financing, is to have more risk-taking developers that are willing to work on projects at a very early stage. To overcome this challenge, we have been promoting within Casa Finance City the establishment of regional financial vehicles with innovative business models to enable and increase the number of well-structured and investment-ready projects, especially models with a project development team as a new arm that can compensate for the lack of human resources, suboptimal regulatory framework, and can overcome, all the efficiencies. And this arm is really essential to give investors sustainable projects to finance, because international investors can see the opportunities, but are not confident enough on the project delivery. You know, I know some infrastructure-oriented investment funds with substantial assets under management that spent years prospecting for infrastructure projects to fund and build in Africa. Still, they struggled to find structured projects with optimal and sustainable contracts. So to settle this issue, some come up with the innovative approach of establishing a development company or business line that can act as an incubator of projects for the investment fund. This is the case of Africa 50 that we are proud to host within Casa Finance City. I'd like to warmly congratulate Alain Ebobisse and his team for everything they do in the continent, but also for being such a role model in Africa. One of Africa 50's strength is that it has the capacity to take on more risks than the private sector, thanks to its access to public funds, which enables it to put the necessary efforts during the whole development period. And since Africa 50 joined our ecosystem, we saw other infrastructure funds follow path, such as Infraco Africa, Themis. And today, between Africa 50, Themis, and Infraco Africa, CFC brings together the main African investors and the infrastructure developers in the continent. Actually, the only major African actor that's missing, I'm talking about African, for instance, Meridiam is based in Paris. You know, the only major African actor that's missing is Africa Finance Corporation, which is presently based in Nigeria. Now, to be able to attract these players, we have put in place a specific value proposition, which includes a business-friendly environment. And here, Casa Finance City offers several fast tracks to incorporate a company, to get a license. Also, in terms of people flow, one essential element when an investor or a management team is selecting a regional office is the fluidity of human capital, especially in terms of hiring foreign employees and, you know, the ability to attract the appropriate talent pool. So under CFC, not only are there no restrictions with regards to hiring, but the process of bringing foreign employees on board is much faster. And moreover, we have a dedicated team in CFC to accompany and support the members, employees, and relatives with their administrative paperwork. And we also have a dedicated expat center to assist with the relocation of company staff and their families. And actually, we have been working with the teams of Africa 50 to put in place this expat center. We also have a value proposition in terms of capital flow. Actually, there is a streamlined process and you have the entire freedom to manage your foreign assets with no restriction at all. This value prop also includes an attractive tax framework, which I could dive in details if you wish later on. And last but not least, it is also about community intelligence, because today, CFC members collectively operate in more than 50 African countries. This means that today we have a thriving community that knows how to do business in Africa with the right expertise, with the right network and knowledge. So it's not just any type of community with single members. It is more of a collective community where people work together, share experiences, and help each other for the business development in Africa.
All right, thank you so much, Lamia. So much that that we can all learn from there. Thanks very much for that. And you also mentioned Alain Ebobisse, so it's really great that we have him coming up next. But before that, we're going to take the result of the poll that came up before the first key point. So let's see. Right. So the majority of you think that the biggest contribution to infrastructure, besides funding from the private sector, could be innovation and technology. I think that was my choice. I wouldn't have said it wasn't, even if it wasn't. But yeah, that's me too. And secondly, skills development and capacity building. And a few people, 1%, say other. It would be interesting to know what your other is, but perhaps you could put it in the chat section, because we do want to keep this interactive. And remember, there's a Q&A box as well, ladies and gentlemen. If you do want us to potentially take on your questions, you have to put them in the Q&A box. Right, so That's that. Now, as I said, we do have a guest speaker here with us today. So join me in welcoming Alan Ibabisi, the CEO of Africa 50, a Pan-African infrastructure investment platform. Africa 50 was established to help bridge Africa's infrastructure funding gap by facilitating project development, mobilizing public and private sector finance, and investing in infrastructure on the continent. It's great to have Alan here with us. Hello, Alan, are you there?
Well, I'm here, but the camera is not on. Maybe I will speak without camera on. Maybe people don't want to see me.
Can we fix that, or is that something?
I'll start my video. Let's see whether the host will allow me. Okay.
Oh, yeah, there you are. Yeah, we definitely want to see you.
Everybody's disappointed seeing me, saying actually maybe.
No, it's good to see you. So anyway, now Africa 50 we know is a unique investment platform. Could you share your perspective on the continent's infrastructure development needs and what innovative financial mechanisms can be leveraged to bridge the funding gap?
Okay, thank you, Didi, for that introduction, and really a warm welcome to the distinguished speakers and experts who are with us today, and really a special thank you to my brother, the guest speaker, Minister Gabriel Curtis. We're very grateful Africa 50 that you could all join us for this important discussion, and welcome also to the audience. Look, our mandate at Africa 50 is very clear. I think Lamia started to talk about it very convincingly. Thank you, Lamia. We were funded by African governments and the African Development Bank to help attract private sector investment into the continent's infrastructure, and also importantly to accelerate project delivery, because this is very important. The vision was to create an African entity to help solve an African challenge, contribute, because there are many entities that are working to solve that challenge. But one of the things that we do is that we really want to leverage strong collaboration with local investors, local participants, local developers, as well as international partners. We operate commercially, even though we are funded so far by the African Development Bank and African government, including the Republic of Guinea, the Republic of Gabon, and the Kingdom of Morocco, just to mention those who are here, the countries. And importantly enough, and I think a lot of people mentioned that, we provide early stage risk capital, project development capital, which is so key to ensuring that projects are bankable and ready for investment. We also have a vehicle that provides later stage investment, which we call Project Finance Vehicle. And really in 5 years of operations, in fact, we haven't been around for a long time. Before Africa 50, I was at the World Bank Group for a lot more years, running the project development group of IFC globally. So I've done a number of projects across the world. But for us here in Africa, we are able to demonstrate that in very few years of operations, we're able to make good investment, a lot of them. We made about 11 investments, some of them actually already delivering infrastructure services to African population and businesses, such as the 400 megawatt solar plant a series of solar plants that we have in Egypt. This is connected to the grid, delivering power. We have a project in Guinea, the airport project in Guinea, that thanks to His Excellency President Alpha Condé. We worked on Kigali Innovation City. We have flagship projects such as the Kinshasa-Brazzaville Congo Bridge, to Congo Bridge, we call it. So we have a number of projects under development. And I should mention also Kigali Innovation City, because it's really a great project that the government of Rwanda, under the leadership of His Excellency President Kagame, picked Africa 50 as a co-developer. So there's a huge financing gaps that we know. And the way we're thinking about it, it's about thinking about ways in which we can really build faster. Now, one of the things that we have been advocating is that any post-pandemic stimulus plan should include a strong infrastructure component. Infrastructure is good as a stimulus investment, and we believe that priority should be given to projects which stimulate the economy, create employment, bolster supply chains, expand access to healthcare, education, and especially also broadband connectivity. So to bridge the gap, how do we do that? one of the things, I mean, my colleagues spoke about many things which I endorse. One of the things that I like to highlight, though, is that we have seen a massive capital flight away from emerging market, really, not only Africa, but in Africa, we also saw a big capital flight because of the crisis. We see that typically in crisis, the capital flies away from emerging market. The IMF figures for Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, was about $5 billion actually in a few months from February to May, left Africa to go elsewhere. So what we need to do is to, while we are continuing to try to attract global funds, we have to very much focus on leveraging our own African resources and encourage more project participation from African institutions, commercial banks. At Africa 50, we see some activity there, we see some momentum. For example, what we did recently in one of our projects, we raised $75 million to fund the Malikunda project in Senegal from a group of African banks led by Ora Bank. This is good stuff. We need to raise capital from the continent to invest in the continent. Now, we see a number of banks continue to do this, but the big money is really from institutional investors, pension funds, sovereign wealth funds. Everybody knows the estimate about $2 trillion under management. I'm happy to see that Akim is here and it's looking at investment in infrastructure. I spoke to my brother Uche at the NSIA in Nigeria, a number of sovereign wealth funds. We need to bring more institutional investors' capital into Africa infrastructure. And one of the vehicles that we're offering for that is asset recycling, which Franny, you mentioned quickly, is essentially a situation where some governments, they have good assets that they own today. We are telling our government shareholders, look, you don't need to own this asset. Basically, you can concession out these assets to credible private investors and use the proceeds of that concession or whatever PPP you want to implement to fund new assets. You're recycling the money. Otherwise, the money will be immobilized in stuff that you don't need necessarily to keep the money into that. So I think, and I will end with that, we need to be saying to people that, okay, we in Africa, we are seeking the world's help, helping us, artists contributing, but we also need to leverage our own resources. We need to send that message. I think it's a very powerful message if we say, while we are getting money from outside and seeking help, we are also finding ways for us to leverage our own resources to invest in our own project. I think sometimes when you have people from the continent investing or investors in project, that creates a lot of momentum. Of course, you have to continue to build the enabling environment, an enabling environment which is conducive for investment. So I just want to start with that. I assume I have maybe one more question to be a bit more precise, but that was a general comment.
Fantastic, Alan. Thanks so much for pointing that out. Asset recycling. We do know that a lot of the projects or assets that are sought after for recycling are those with established revenue streams. So, brownfield assets. And, when it comes to greenfield projects, there's a lot less investment there. And a lot of that has to do with the perception of risk. And I just want to get your view on how these risks can be mitigated and, how we can showcase Africa better and, our investment opportunities.
Well, look, let me first start by saying that why we have to acknowledge that there are risks involved in investing in infrastructure projects in Africa, just like everywhere in developing countries, it is also time to dispel the myth that investment in Africa are riskier than elsewhere. That's not true. In 2020, Moody's study, Moody's, the rating agencies, they have a study that demonstrate that Africa's cumulative 10 years infrastructure debt default is about 1.9%. It's the second lowest worldwide. Okay, so and also the Africa, we have 100% infrastructure debt recovery rate. So aside from that, we can say that the good returns, we can do good, we can have a good impact and make good money here. So we must share the success stories that we see here in Africa. And I think if we talk a lot more about what works, while acknowledging that we have some challenges, I think we can help. Because this continent is full of opportunities. You know, I think everybody knows about the AFCFTA, the African Continental Free Trade Area. Big opportunity. Think of it. A market of 1.3 billion people where goods can flow freely. This is sizable market, you know, it's very exciting. Let's talk about these opportunities. Now, there's risk, but when it comes to risk, we know how to structure those things. We know how to mitigate the risk. Risk have to be allocated to the parties which are the best able to handle them. Franny was mentioning today earlier, land acquisition. So yeah, we have to be totally acknowledge that the private sector is not very good at certain risks. And a government should try to avoid pushing some of the risks on the private sectors, and vice versa. Actually, the private sector also should try to push some of the risk on government, that government is not the best place to manage. So I believe that the recipe for structuring bankable projects is known, but I think what is required, and this is why Africa 50 is focusing on that, is project development capital also, and resources, so that people can actually effectively roll up their sleeves, spend money at risk to make those projects bankable. Because I tell you, once the projects are bankable, lots of people come. In fact, people fight for a piece of the action when you get the project to the bankability phase.
Sure. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing your view with us. Alain Ibibisi, CEO of Africa 50. It was a pleasure to have you there. I'm going to move on back to our panelists. We're going to touch on the second key point. Here it is. It says asset under management by African institutional investors are estimated to be close to $1.8 trillion. What role can African institutional investors play in bridging the infrastructure financing gap? So in other words, how do we channel these funds for infrastructure development on the continent? I think I will start once again with Fanny. Perhaps we could get a few comments from you on that.
Yes, thank you very much, Didi. And I really agree 100% with what Alain said in the previous questions that you asked him. I think there is a huge opportunity for African institutional investors to contribute and actually lead the infrastructure revolution in Africa. And let me start by saying that Africa is the only continent where such institutional capital has not contributed tremendously to the development of the continent. Every other continent in the world has really relied on those institutional investors. So I think it's about time that the institutional investors come in. Secondly, I would say within that challenge are a number of institutional investors who are actually leading and innovating. And of course, my brother Akim just mentioned the innovation that he has come up with this SPV in the case of crowding in private equity investment from outside Africa to be paired up with institutional capital from within Africa. So I think there's a lot of innovation going on, but unfortunately it is not at scale. And even within the countries where it has been implemented, there's a lot more that could be done if we can convince the outside investors and even the commercial investors within Africa itself to partner with institutional investors in that leadership role. So here there is a very important role for the national development banks as well, because they are one of the players, because they're in between this commercial funding, but with national priorities. They can actually take a big role to bridge the gap on the debt side so that the institutional investors can come in on the equity side, where the instruments may be better suited to that kind of capital. And then finally, I would say there is some reform needed on the institutional investor side as well. For example, very few countries allow their capital to be invested outside their borders. There are now a number of countries who are changing those policies, raising the cap to 30% or 50%, as was done recently in South Africa. But most countries are still at about 5% cap of the resources that can be invested outside the borders of the country. And the majority of institutional investors use that 5% window to actually invest totally outside of Africa. So there are very few that leverage that opportunity from within Africa. So I think there's a lot of room to grow there. And one opportunity for that is that you mentioned the large size of the assets under management, but the prediction is that that would grow even further because more and more people are going into social security payments and contributing to retirement funds, insurance funds, and pension funds. The population of Africa is growing and projected to come to 2 billion when you look at the entire continent. So we are facing a positive growth in the potential AUM, and therefore an opportunity that if we can professionalize the investment decisions today, give the right incentives and innovations and examples using, for instance, the success that Akin has managed to have in his case, shared and broadly practiced beyond the borders of where he is. And finally, pairing up the institutional investors with national development banks, we could really open up great opportunities for bridging the infrastructure gap.
Thanks for that, Franny. I'd like to bring in Akin, because obviously a necessary step, is to deepen local capital markets, which are the largest source of infrastructure funding in many developed countries. But where do we start with this, and how can governments and DFIs help?
Thank you, Didi. I'm not on mute. Okay. As Alain, Franny, and all of my previous colleagues today have mentioned, we live in unique times, and those unique times calls for innovative mechanism. And I totally agree that sovereign wealth fund can be part of that, have to be part of that conversation, and can bring some of those mechanisms to the table with long-term investors, patient capital, and even in terms of requirement, in terms of returns on investment, we do have that double bottom line approach whereby the impact can be higher than the financial return in terms of what we expect from a project. But what I wanted to say here is, it was mentioned, the financing of project preparation is a bottleneck. It's something that have prevented many projects to come to line, because like I like to say when I talk, when we have those conversations, everybody wants to enjoy a good meal, but nobody wants to go to the kitchen. So in terms of, you don't see many players coming in at an early stage, and they will come once the project is closed. The sovereign wealth fund or institutional investors have a role to play into fronting those financing those project preparation, but also bringing in their understanding of the environment and the connection to the government, which will help reduce the risk perception that was mentioned by Alain earlier, and ultimately will have an impact and increase the readability of the local environment for the investors. And I think this is really a key role that institutions like us have to play in terms of bringing the financing, having some skin in the game, but also bringing the understanding of the local knowledge. And again, just to illustrate again, and I'm sorry to go back to that project, but that King Elaba project, and you will understand why we're so excited about that project. We have invested 12% of the overall cost of the project. But those 12% were instrumental into attracting 18 additional % from Meridiam. And together, those 30% were able to attract the buy-in of DFIs for the 70 remaining % of the overall cost of the project. We're talking about a 160 million euros project. And when so we're really excited because it's a change of paradigm. And as Alain was saying, the last power plant that was built in Gabon was about 10 years ago, and it was fully financed by the government budget. Today, we're financing that hydro dam just by investing 12% of its overall cost. And this is the type of success that we had, and we're trying to replicate in other sectors as well. Let me not be too long on this, I'll pause here, but I think this is the type of value added that we can have.
Yeah, thanks for that. Thanks for adding to that. I just want to bring in Lamia to quickly add to that point on the role that African institutional investors can play in bridging the infrastructure financing gap, after which we'll move straight to the next guest speaker. Lamia?
You know, again, I think that, as Alain said, really, if we are able to put in place a framework within which the project in terms of development, then, you know, everyone will rush on these projects. I think it's, you know, the key message to have on that.
Yeah. Thanks so much for that, Lamia. We're going to now move on to our next guest speaker. Gabriel Curtis is a Minister of Investment and Public-Private Partnerships for the Republic of Guinea. As you know, the PPP model is a well-acknowledged strategy that can help Africa to bridge its infrastructure deficit. And this model has been successfully adopted or used by emerging market economies around the world. And you know, we have success stories across the African continent. So it's great to have you with us, sir. Can I just confirm that you're there and you can hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Fantastic. So we hear a lot about PPPs for large-scale projects, and many African countries have set up their own PPP units to improve these collaborations. What has been Guinea's experience in this domain? Perhaps you could tell us some of the key infrastructure investment opportunities that also exist in Guinea, and you know, what are the lucrative opportunities for private sector investment here?
Well, thank you very much, Didi, for this introduction. I'm really glad to join this conversation with all these distinguished panelists. You know, the government of Guinea has realized that we need to, just like anywhere else on the continent, we really need to invest more in infrastructure because the government does not have the budget or the financing to be able to undertake all that we need, because in infrastructure, we need to invest in mobility, roads, ports, airports, railways. We need to invest in ICT, in urbanization. Our urban population is growing, so we need to invest in housing. We need to invest in energy, in logistical platforms, in ICT. So those are absolutely important because without infrastructure, there's no development. Guinea has put in place PPP law and regulations to help steer more and more investments through the PPP models that exist. But that said, we didn't wait to have the framework, the legal framework to start with PPP. In 2010, late 2010, when the president was elected, we had major difficulties for those that know Guinea. We didn't have electricity. Our road system is in shambles. We have very little housing. Our urban planning is inadequate. Our telecommunication were not on par. Having access to mobile telecommunication was very difficult. So we really focused on that. And what was done in terms of infrastructure, the first thing that was done is to look at energy, because even if you take the infrastructure space, without energy, there's no development, because I couldn't be able to talk to you because we wouldn't have electricity. So we use a PPP model to build hydropower dam. So within 10 years, we multiplied by 10 the amount of electricity production of the country, from about 100 and some odd megawatts produced to over 1,000 megawatts that we're currently producing. This is all thanks to PPP. The two largest investments in the energy sector were two dams. The first one was the Kaleta at 240 megawatts. And in that one, the government had to front about 30% of the cost, and the rest was taken by Chinese investments. And the second one was and it cost about $500 million. The second one was Swapiti. It's 450 megawatt dam, and that one costs about $1.3 billion. And then again, the government fronted about 15% of the money. And then the rest we leverage what was done in Caleta to be able to bring in as part of the assets for Swapiti. I'm just summarizing it. It's a bit more complicated, but that's what we use to leverage it. Obviously, and these were very successful. Now we've been able to really multiply by 10 our energy production. But we're doing exactly the same thing also in the housing sector because there is really a lack of housing. About 1 million units. We need about 1 million units for the whole country to be built right now. And right now we have about 50,000 units that we've been able to negotiate via PPPs, and some of them are ongoing. But I must say that in terms of opportunity, they are still there, as I explained to you, with the urbanization, with the mobility, with roads, with ports, with railways. I have to say hello to Alain Bobissé with Africa 50 that accepted to invest in our airport so that our airport can be modernized, and he's also investing in a new port in Guinea. But from our standpoint, and I'm going back to what was said previously, the risk factor plays a big role. What we've done so far was the easy part, because investing in energy production, you know, it's going to be taken. There's going to be an offtake. Anyway, when you do a PPP in energy production, it's generally a take or pay. So you take everything and you have to pay everything. So basically you are limiting the risk. For all the others, if you talk about housing, if you talk about a logistical platform, if you talk about roads, it's a little bit more difficult because people have, investors have a difficulty analyzing the risks that are involved with it. The second issue is concerned with, I'm talking about from the government standpoint. We are willing to entice our private sector or other international private sector to invest in our infrastructure, but we are oftentimes limited by the IMF and by some of the multilateral organizations that are saying, you know, we cannot go into such and such deals. For example, for Guinea, we can only have concessional loans, which is limiting our ability to really leverage or to take on more debt in order to finance infrastructure. It's very, very limiting in that sense. We need a little bit more flexibility in that sense. We also need a lot more. We need patient capital. I think Mr. Akim Dauda mentioned it. We need more patient capital because we don't. Generally people want to invest, but they want to invest and recoup the investment within 2, 3, 4 years. Whereas, the growth pattern in our countries are still very strong, despite what is happening with COVID and all that. Guinea last year had a 7% growth. The third thing also, we need innovation and we need to think outside the box. I take the case of Guinea. We have these major mining projects. And with this mining project, we are leveraging beyond the mining project to also build in infrastructure. We've been able, in more than 50 years, we've been able to build the first railway. That's going to be multi-usage because we are developing a mine, so they're building a railway, so they're sure that they're going to have, it's going to be profitable, and making it multi-usage, so you can use it for passenger, and you can use it also for goods, to transport goods from one end to the other. So that's what we're trying to do. Combining these projects, the mining projects, to enable us to leverage on those projects, to enable us to build more infrastructure, to build more housing, because we know these projects are coming. So you can build more, you can have more development housing. So you can have a logistical platform. You can open entire region, for agriculture, using these infrastructure. You can now have you're in a better position to open roads in those regions because you know that development is coming there. And that's what we're trying to do, and to try to entice people to invest in those sectors.
Right, Gabriel Curtis, Minister of Investment and Public-Private Partnerships for the Republic of Guinea. Thank you so much for sharing that with us, very insightful. We shall move now to the third and final key point of the day. The final key point will touch on the opportunities available for private sector investment and highlight some of the success stories in the region, many of which we have heard across the whole breadth of this conversation that we've had today. Many of you have pointed out those opportunities and success stories. There are opportunities for the private sector to focus on future infrastructure developments, especially those tackling climate change. And I know that this is an area that we're going to focus on a lot more in our third webinar, which, as I said, is coming up after the summer. But we do want to touch on this in some way as well today. I'm going to start with Lamia. Lamia, hello. Tell us, what is Casablanca doing to attract green finance to Africa?
Well, it's a great question, Didi. Actually, I'm a fierce believer on sustainable finance, and I believe that the future of finance can only be green and sustainable, actually. Today, Africa represents the weakest link in green finance. It attracts less than 5% of green investment flows, and at the same time, it has the greatest potential to make massive leapfrogs in sustainable development. So, how to catalyze more sustainable finance flows to the continent? I believe we have to show the world that there is a strong will in Africa to green to green sustainable development, to commit to sustainable development, and to green the financial system, actually. This can be done through multiple ways. The first way is through international cooperation. I think that we need to be present in the various forums in the world to make the African voice heard, and also to boost the interest of international investors. As an example, I can share with you my experience with the FC4S network, the Financial Centers for Sustainability Network, because this is actually what we have been trying to do since the inception of this network. So the FC4S is the network of the world's green financial centers, born out of the G7 presidency in partnership with the UN. It represents today over 80% of global equity markets. It was launched on African grounds in Casablanca with the signing of the Casablanca Declaration, thanks to the willingness of the UN environment to include developing countries in a co-development approach. And the purpose of the network is to accelerate green finance transition. And here, I must say, we have really been able to create a real space and a real attentiveness and aura for Africa within this global network. Because the first regional platform that has been launched was that of Africa. Then we launched Europe, we launched Asia and the Americas. And the process was not that easy, of course, because by and large, Africa is at a very early stage of the sustainable finance transition. Now, this FC4S African chapter is a unique platform, not only to attract international green finance, but also it has been accelerating the emergence of new financial center bodies, namely Abidjan, Cairo, Lagos, that adopted sustainability as a strategic priority in their DNA from the start. However, there are several challenges, in Africa, which are diverse levels of development on the sustainable finance. And in many countries, sustainable finance is still a niche. And that is why we need to work on capacity building. This is actually what we have done in the FC4S, in the African platform. We began with training programs, raising the awareness and rallying the stakeholders around green finance in Africa. Last but not least, to be able to channel green investment flows to the continent, we need to put in place the appropriate framework. And it is precisely what we have done at CFC, where we have put in place this broad value proposition that has enabled us to gather the players I mentioned earlier. All of them are very active in sustainable development, in particular in renewable energies. Africa 50 has obviously plenty of sustainable projects. Infraco has received the African DFI of the Year 2020 award for its solar power project in Malawi. And Themis has just won the tender contract for building a hydroelectricity generation plant in Ivory Coast. But the challenge now is to have something more specific for green and sustainable players. I mean, the specific value proposition. And this is something that we are working on right now through international cooperation.
Thank you so much, Lamia, for that. Franny, I'll have you come in as well. As we know, green funds are increasing across Africa. How can we attract more?
Thank you very much, Didi, and I appreciate a lot what Lamia just said. I think we can attract more green financing first by preparing a very attractive project pipeline. And this is really possible to do because there's a lot of opportunity, there's a lot of innovation. And I'd say there are a couple of areas that are really critical. We've solved the energy problem to a large extent. We still have more to do. We've done a lot in the transport side, but water is going to be one of the next big challenges for Africa, and particularly the role of local governments in getting solutions to the water challenge. That's where project pipelines that attract green finance into the water sector, I think, will be highly critical. The third area would be matching the innovations we had in the fintech side with innovations in the green investing and sustainability side. Again, Africa has a huge opportunity there. Pay as you go, for example, where you can bring in electricity solutions, water solutions, and other solutions where people can pay as they need and therefore allow the financing to progress the way it did, for instance, with the pay cards for the telecom sector. We can use innovations in fintech to also aggregate demand so that you can provide a scalable project for green investment to a private enterprise by aggregating multiple rural demands or urban demands. This can be done in waste collection, in electricity, if you're using solar power, in a distributed network, or in mobile solutions for refrigeration, for example. And the third area, I think, which is also very critical for green financing is, again, unleashing the power of the national development banks to take first loss and come in and attract green investment from the private sector. I think that is absolutely critical and it's doable. And we have examples already that can be shared and taken to scale.
Fantastic. Thanks for that, Franny. And Akim, I hear that you're working on a green finance PPP in Gabon. Would certainly like to hear more about this.
Thank you, Didi. Actually, most of our project, let's say, they have a green finance component in the sense that even in terms of energy transition, we're moving from a mix now where we have 50% of our energy coming from fossil fuel and 50% coming from hydro. We're moving toward 80 to 20, 80% of the energy coming from hydro, 20 coming from natural gas. That being said, we also have this, Gabon is known for being one of the, let's say, being at the forefront of the fight against climate change in the region. A few weeks ago, we received 17 million from Norway to protect our forests, for instance. So this is really to show the position that the country is taking. Now, talking about the projects that we currently developing within the sovereign wealth fund, and which has impact in terms of ESG, for instance, and Franny mentioned it, we're currently financing a water treatment station for the city of Libreville with the associated pipes to provide water for the Libreville city, which is currently under pressure for deficit of power. And for this project, for instance, we have partners such as Eranov. They're based out of Paris, but the main operation are in Abidjan. So they consider us a Pan-African company, and they really joined us in this project at the early stage. And also, I will just circle back to something that was mentioned before in terms of what are the key elements to make sure that those projects are successful in our environment. And I believe that the involvement of the private sector is really key, because it ensures that the structure that we put in place is self-liquidating and that all the stakeholders are taking into consideration, be it ESG in terms of the investors, ESG, the communities, and so on and so forth. Because also Minister Curtis mentioned it, we're no longer developing projects, especially in those sectors such as energy or power or roads or ports. We're no longer developing projects where we expect the government to foot the bill. So we have to make sure that those projects will be self-liquidating. Thank you.
Right. All right. Thank you very much for that. Right now, I'm going to bring in a question from the audience. We have about 4 minutes left, and we do want to bring in one question at least. And this question goes to the minister from Guinea. I think it'd be great to have him back. And I'm going to read it out. It says, I'm sure you can all see it anyway. Zambia is the first African country to signal private sector debt default. However, it may not be the last on the African continent. How does the minister see the implication of private sector debt for multilateral initiatives and the international debt architecture for future infrastructure lending, given the minister's remarks regarding the MDB's prescription of using concessional financing in the case of Guinea and other LDCs? So I'll let the minister come in to answer that.
Thank you very much. This is a very interesting question, and it's very key, because generally when we are faced with a discussion with the IMF and major development banks, they are often very much looking at our international debt, but we do have internal debt that needs to be addressed. That's why we are, depending on the type of projects that are undertaken, or the debt that we have against private sector, we've requested to be able to support more our private sector. We requested more flexibility in that regard, because we do not have sufficient leeway in terms of dealing with the internal debt. I believe that just like Mr. Akim Dauda, that the private sector involvement is absolutely key, because it helps really bring in more discipline and bring more efficiency to the different projects that we undertake. And I think that the government should, especially our private sector, should be helped and should be supported more broadly than what we're allowed to do currently. I don't know if I replied to the question, but
yeah,
just wanted to keep it brief.
Thank you very much for that. And ladies and gentlemen, we now have a final question of the day, which is for Mr. Alan Ibobisi, the CEO of Africa 50. We welcome him back again. Now, we talked about the AFCFTA in our last webinar. So I'd like to ask you, sir, could the AFCFTA help foster public-private partnerships aimed at infrastructure projects?
Thank you. Well, thank you, Didi. Look, the AFCFTA is really, in my opinion, a game changer. I think and its implementation comes at an opportune time, because if done expeditiously, it can actually contribute also to overcoming some of the economic fallout of COVID. In fact, we all know many of Africa's biggest development challenges, such as electricity supply, transportation, require cross-border solutions, especially for some of our countries in the continent, which are landlocked. So I do believe that, with the limited public resources, AFCFTA, because countries have made commitment to helping address some of the coordination issues, can actually help speed up the implementation of some of the regional projects which are so needed in the infrastructure space. Unfortunately, not too much money today is invested in regional projects. The figure is about 2%, according to the Infrastructure Consortium for Africa. 2% of investment in infrastructure in Africa goes to regional projects. This is way too small. It has to be much more. And Africa 50, what we're doing our part. One of the projects that we are doing, which is a regional project, is the Tokongo Bridge project, which is connecting Kinshasa and Brazzaville. We are the lead developer for that. And I think we need to demonstrate that some of those projects can take place. They're a bit harder but they can be done. We can do those projects. And I think agreeing to with my fellow panelists here that the private sector participation, having the mindset of structuring those projects at PPP brings a certain level of discipline, which is so important. But I would finish by saying that honestly, we know the recipe, we know how to do these things, certainly, and we also have examples of stuff that have been done successfully, and we need to talk a lot more about those. But the game changer for me will be when enough people on the public side or private sector side realize that there is a huge opportunity cost. The opportunity cost and the financial cost for delaying project implementation, for taking so much time to execute project, a huge opportunity cost. I think it's everybody's interest to bring those projects to operations as quickly as possible, because citizens get services, investors get a fair return, and government can leverage their successes, because once you do a project is successful, you can talk about it and then bring even more projects. At Africa 50, we have demonstrated that we can actually invest positively and make big impact. Developing impact is part of our core mandate, but also making decent returns. And there is nothing wrong with making money. In fact, it's good to make money if you're delivering good impact, because making money would then attract additional investors that will come in and make an impact and make money. So that's what I would say.
Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Africa CEO Forum, I'd like to thank the CEO of Africa 50, Alan Ibobisi. Thanks so much for concluding there for us. I'd also like to thank all our speakers and our panelists, Jude Moore, Senior Policy Fellow at Center for Global Development, Lamia Mazuki, Deputy GM at the Casablanca Finance City Authority, Franny Lutier, CEO Southbridge Investment, and Akim Daudu, CEO, the Gabonese Fund for Strategic Investment. And also like to thank the Minister of Investment and Public-Private Partnerships for the Republic of Guinea, Gabriel Curtis. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us today. Now, I think that's a good place to leave it, ladies and gentlemen. Remember that this is the second of 3 in a webinar series on infrastructure development in Africa in partnership with Africa 50. The next webinar, which is our 3rd in this series, will come up after the summer. And in that session, we will tackle innovation and ESG aspects in the infrastructure space in the context of climate change and the continent's rapid urbanization. More information will be passed across by the Africa CEO Forum team as we come closer to the date. My name is Didi Akinyelure, and on behalf of the Africa CEO Forum, once again, I'd like to thank you all. Thank you to our panelists, guest speakers, our experts for sharing your views with us. And thank you very much to the audience, our viewers, for joining in, for your conversation in the chat box, and for your questions. Have a good day, everyone, and thank you.